Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, I'm super excited because we're going to talk to Sundar Arvind, the CEO and co-founder of Mozart AI, a London-based startup that raised over $7 million to date to build the world's first collaborative generative audio workstation for collaborative music creation. Sundar is also a former top 3 tennis player in India and a music producer with more than 2 million Spotify streams. And he, of course, is on a mission to bridge AI and artistry to make production more accessible. Joining us is Daniel Waterhouse, partner at Balderton Capital, where he invests in transformative tech like AI, health, and enterprise software with portfolio companies, including Revolut and Zoe. We, of course, all know that Balderton are on quite the tear. We'll dive into AI's role in music from innovations to legal hurdles, and we have a bonus heat for you. We've got Ash Pournouri, who is the ex-Avicii manager and PRMD founder, who will join us for a special segment talking about how AI is impacting musicians straight up. Let's get into it.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Guys, did I get some of this correct?
Yeah, nailed it. All of it.
It's great that you're speaking to Ash as well because Mozart is built by musicians for musicians, and spot on.
Maybe let's start right there. Tell us a bit more about Mozart, how you're different from the other solutions that are already there. Daniel, of course, I want to ask you a bit about how does Balderton underwrite a new player in a market where there's already a firm or a company that's been funded with hundreds of millions?
The reason Mozart exists is to empower musicians with the right set of AI tools to help them create faster, better music. We believe the journey of music creation should exist, but it's just going through this phase of re-innovation where we're just recreating the journey, reducing the amount of time you spend on engineering and increasing the amount of time you spend on translating intent into sound. So that's what Mozart is trying to build. So we're not just trying to build this one-stop prompt engine where you prompt and you get a song. That's, of course, in the product if people like to use it. But what we really care about is the journey. So we want you to build a song. We try and give you as much control with as less complexity as possible. So you can do things like adding vocals, adding effects just with language. And we're also trying to make this a multiplayer experience very, very soon. So multiple people making music at the same time has never existed in the industry. So hopefully we're looking to be the first ones to do that.
This was all about democratizing music creation. I think that is the core of what Mozart wants to do, is to kind of unleash creativity in people. And, over time, the ability for people to take what's inside them and create great music has got a bit easier. There's been some great innovation some time ago with things like drum machines and synths, and there's been some great software, DAWs, that's been developed to help people produce music. But these are still quite hard, accessible for many people, and it provides a big barrier. And what AI can do and what's is at the heart of the Mozart vision is provide a new tool almost to allow more people to be able to unleash what's inside them. And so we're really excited about that because music is so central to pretty much everyone's life, and music is in a lot of people. And if we can break down the barrier, help them break down the barriers to get more out of them, that'd be amazing.
Let's level set a little bit because everyone, and I literally yesterday listened to 2 podcasts on this topic by some of the mainstream media stations that were diving deep into how will music change and so on. It felt to me that they kind of got stuck on the one click and done type of approach. Could you talk about that and whether both, of course, re-amplify, so to say, or emphasize that is not your main journey and why you think that that's not the important part, why you think that's actually maybe missing the point? And then also talk about maybe some of the changes that have happened in music over the past many generations, where we've seen music be reinvented every single time, and technology only just made things, as you said, Daniel, more democratically approachable for everyone, but also just honestly gave us new creative art.
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I'll start with, what we've had in the last 30 odd years and why it's increased the number of people who create music exponentially every single time. I mean, I think digital audio workstations started 30 years ago when we were able to finally make music on our computers, and people freaked out that that would commoditize music, that would make people stop going to concerts. Why would people didn't understand why someone would watch a DJ perform by clicking a button on their computer? All of these things are now mainstream. We have roughly 200 million bedroom producers, and that number was zero 30 years ago. So it created new genres, electronic dance music, which is the biggest genre today. So tech has always been assisting and helping democratize music. And this, AI is just going to do the same, but orders of magnitude bigger, because now someone who's able to play a guitar is finally able to realize they can use that guitar in a song without knowing anything about music production. They have taste, they know their music, they know what they like to hear, and they're finally able to express that through language. I think why you see people fixating on one prompt songs is because this was just impossible 3 years ago. You weren't able to make a song with a prompt. That's pretty magical to a lot of people. But what ends up happening is you're betting on these non-deterministic machines to get your intent right on the first attempt. And that, we think, is not the right approach, because you may get 80% of the way there if you're lucky, maybe 70% on average, but you still want to continue building that song and refining it to what you have in your brain. And a lot of that is voice-based. A lot of that is a little more than just prompting. So that's why we try to bake that journey in as easy as possible without the complexities of traditional workstations. So, because every time you get something right in the step, in the journey of music production, there's so much adrenaline, there's so much dopamine. And when you just make that journey extinct, you are satisfying the user once, they're done with the song, and they're making 10,000 songs a month. And that's what leads to all sorts of problems. So by focusing more on quality rather than quantity of music, you're letting this user turn intent into sound a lot more than they do on one prompt.
Yeah, I think, and that's the core of what we're thinking about here. I think there's obviously people enjoying doing what kind of one prompt song creation. I think it's kind of fun, it's faddish, it's kind of entertaining for a while. So like a lot of these content creation tools that have come and gone over the years, where you have a bit of fun with it, but there's no value created there. You're not really expressing any creativity, and ultimately the output is going to sink to the bottom. I didn't really see long-term value in that, in frankly, taking other people's work and creating something which is almost exactly identical is not the right thing to be doing. That said, obviously, music over the years, the history of music is inspiration by what's come before, and taking what an emerging genre is created and playing with that and moving it forward. And that's how music has worked for decades now. And so, of course, getting inspired by a certain sound, a certain genre is a great starting place to create your own music. But as Sundar said, you've got to inject your own adrenaline and pizzazz into that to create something truly wonderful.
Daniel, I want to stay with you 1 second, because I want to ask you the obvious question. And I think a lot of founders out there will want to hear the answer to this from a big VC like yourself. How do you underwrite a new founding team building something in a market where there's already a big player with a lot of momentum? There's actually two, because there's Suno and Udemy. And Suno, as an example, have already raised 250 million at a 2.4 billion valuation. And then you said, let's do this. We think that there's room for this new player. Talk about how you scope that, how you think about the market when doing this.
Yeah, there's a few dimensions to that. I mean, obviously, the team is critical, and any investment we make, we have to have incredible conviction on the people we're investing in. At the stage we've invested in Mozart, it's very early, so the team plays an even bigger role. You talked a little bit about Sundar's background. He has got incredible character, has proven himself to do extraordinary things in a few short years that he's been walking the planet. Just has this energy, passion, and vision for what he wants to create that's infectious, and it assembled the great co-founders and team around it to do that.
Just unpack that, because you said he has done incredible things while being on the planet. You're absolutely right. Like last time we spoke, Sundar, I don't know if you're public about your age, but you surely you said, "Dude, I'm 23." When I asked you, "Do you have kids yet?" And then and that's just to say, by age 23, I was not a top three tennis player, not even in Denmark, much less India, and nor did I have 2 million Spotify streams on some of my music. Sundar, it is quite incredible what we've managed to do. Can you talk a bit about like the tenacity of someone like you?
Well, it's almost like I get thrown into these random careers, or I just find them, and I just have to make it to the top. I don't know where that drive comes from. It's probably family. I've seen my dad work hard. And because I didn't make it all the way to the top at tennis or music, I have this kind of suppressed ambition. So it's just 100x now. And for me, resource and everything else, whatever is available, make best use of it and just try to build $100 billion company here. Because, everyone can raise money at a big valuation, et cetera, but it's the same as when you play tennis. I was a short guy. I was small. All these Europeans were infinitely bigger than me, and I still made it to the top with whatever little body I had and the shitty genetics I had. So you always find a way to make things happen if you really want it. And now I'm also learning how to make it happen with the team, which is a different thing because I've done all these individual sports and music before, and now you just have to drive the team to be the same. So yeah, new learning, but I'm sure we'll make it there.
Yeah, it's incredible. I just wanted everyone to experience what a prodigy looks like. You don't want to use the prodigy name. I use it though. Daniel, now let's go back to underwriting this. Of course, the teams. The team is absolutely central. What after?
Yeah, well, then you got to think: is this company doing, attacking an interesting market, and the way they're going about it, we think is going to be different enough that they can build a compelling position in that market. And we know the music world quite well. We were, as a firm, we were invested in Cobalt, more on the kind of rights management publishing side of things. In the last firm I worked at, we invested early on in Spotify, so I've seen the kind of distribution, consumption side of music. And I also invested in a music hardware company a while ago. So we've kind of seen enough to know the market and to see the potential for AI to unleash this kind of wave of additional creativity. So we felt good about that. And then, when Sundar talked about what he wanted to achieve, as he's kind of outlined a bit earlier in this conversation, we felt that was actually really different to what the way the other players in the market are thinking about it. For sure, there are companies which are much further ahead today in terms of valuations and users creating tracks, but we think the way they're thinking about the world is different. And by really, really focusing on true creativity and the tooling to do that, and running with that, we can do something quite different. It's also a very big market, and there's just one player who commands the music creation space in the future.
What is the market? Is this like a new guitar, and you imagine owning the guitar market, or?
I think so. I think it's a lot bigger than owning a guitar because, yeah, it's almost like everyone that comes home and watches Netflix now, if you can convince them to make music in their free time, which is what's going on now, they've played the instrument once or twice and they've kept it away in their garage. Maybe they play once a week, twice a week, but now these people are using their free time to actually make music. And also, if you imagine everyone that listens to music, instead of just pressing play on Spotify to hear a song, put your AirPods on and zone out, imagine this much more social experience where all these billion people that listen to music actually engage, remix that song, and do a little more than just pressing play, share that music, do it real time. So I think we'll go to a world where music is a lot more relevant than it is today. And that's why this market is probably 100 times bigger than most people think it is.
It's incredibly interesting to see. And one of course, also thinks about all the AI scenarios where we all don't need to work anymore. And guess what? Probably some of us will be spending our time making music. I would love to just like almost take an early start to our conversation with Ash, because I'd love to ask you, and everyone is going to hear that in just 10 minutes. But I think it's super interesting to hear your take on how users are using the product today. What are you seeing? Adoption rates? How are people using it? Because I remember when we spoke last time, you described this. You have the people that go in, make 3 songs, and they kind of never get much more done. And then you have the people that once you see them more than, I think you said 10 generations in or something, almost all of them are stuck and keep going.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. So on this end of the spectrum, which is more the semi-professionals, bedroom producers that already know some music production, these people are using the platform every single day, generating tens and hundreds of variations on the same stem, trying to almost use this as a add-on to their existing production right now. Because obviously Mozart is still new, there is a lot of work to do on actually bringing the powerful set of tooling from Ableton and trying to make that easy language driven is going to take a little more than 6 months. But these people are using it to make 80% of their song, and then you can see them exporting stems every single hour. So they just come in, make something, export stems, and then they come back 30 minutes later, maybe they mixed it, etc. Then they do the same thing over and over again. So that's one side of the spectrum. And then the opposite end is, as you described, people coming in, making a song, making a music video for it now, because we support that as well. And then they're sharing it, and then they're coming back maybe 3-4 days later to do the same. So it's more of maybe something they do for a couple of minutes a day just to wind down. Maybe they're making this for their friends. I had someone make a song and outbound to me to sell something. So he put the message in the lyrics, and he just shared the link, and I obviously caught my attention. So I think there's a lot of interesting use cases we're starting to unpack now.
I am sure that person was a content marketer, because they are very creative in what they're saying and the way they're selling. Let me ask you, and you of course cannot share this, but I'd be super curious if you have any insights on the professional, the well-known artists that are using your platform. Like, obviously you'll not share usernames and you can see, oh, wait a second, that's probably X, Y, Z. So let's not go there, but just, can you give us some insights to the uptake amongst the true professional musicians?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. If you ask someone that uses Suno to if you're Suno's team and you try to disclose the people that use you, it's probably a lot more hard than it is for us to disclose, because there's not that much of a taboo with us, because we actually have a process. It takes a little more time than just a prompt. So we have some big names. It'll hopefully be out in the press release. They still use it as a tool and not as the only tool in their production suite. But these are people with billions of streams. We have a lot of people, 600, 500 million streams using it. A lot of Latin American producers, a lot of Indian ones as well. So the models that we have on our platform are pretty good at not just English, but actually a diverse set of ethnic genres. LATAM, for instance, is such a huge market that not a lot of people think about when they think about music markets. The adoption there has been absolutely insane. So we're excited to see where that goes.
So back from a bit of a technical issue, in different clothing and with different backgrounds, we'll now continue the episode where we left it off. Daniel, I want to ask you about the legal risks in a market like this. What's your take on this? How did you think about it? How did you investigate it before underwriting the investment?
Yeah, this is obviously a really important topic, and as we're saying, we thought a lot about, because it's essential that any rights holders in the music world are respected, and we tread very carefully on that. And it was a core part of what Sundar and the team thought about up front as well, is making sure that they build a platform and technology that was not going to infringe on anyone's work and not be taking anything away from what they'd produced, and frankly, and put the company in any legal issue. It's one of the reasons why they work with 11 Labs, because of the model they built and where they've gone about that. And it's central to the spirit of the company, frankly. This is about creativity, not about ripping off other people's work. Yeah, I'm encouraged, I think, in general, that there's a lot of focus on this in the industry, and that obviously the music labels are rightly working with other parties to ensure that nothing untoward happens. And I think that's really encouraging. But the DNA of both sides is to be respectful for other people's work.
Can you, before we go to Sundar, just to those that are thinking about what type of DD does a firm like Balderton do when they look into this? How deep do you go? How do you go about it?
Yeah, we do a few things. Obviously, we try and understand the technology and how that's utilizing data that's out there. We try to understand what the 11 Labs model does and does not do, and how that's got the right guardrails in place. And then we would usually also work with relevant legal specialists, in this case, people who understand music copyright and music content, to get their opinion on if there are any risks or holes in what the company might be doing.
Now, Sundar, let me ask you right off the bat. Everyone knows that music is quite a litigious industry. It's quite a hardball industry as well. I think many of us have watched Straight Outta Compton and seen that it's not an easy industry to navigate. Can you talk a bit about how you as a founder approach I was about to call it heavily regulated, but at least an industry where there's a lot of litigiousness happening?
Good question. I was born in India, so real estate is super litigious, and you just see it and live with it, and yeah, it's just one of the parts of being in the industry, and I don't see it as litigious or heavily restrictive. I think the way I see it is there are some people that you have to respect, the rights holders in multiple aspects. There are artists that you have to respect for their work, and then if you build the right products and you build it in the right way, then everyone's happy. So I think that's how we see it. And when I started like my first company, I used to complain, oh my, fintech is so regulated and I just don't know what to do. And the FCA is, I don't understand anything. And I was 21 back then. And yeah, now I've just realized every industry has something and it's just a part of doing the job. So yeah, I don't really think about it in that way.
Let me ask both of you if you could just expand to those in the audience, because now we heard the technical parts of, so to say, and the methodical parts about how to manage a regulated industry and where there's litigious behavior, so to say. I'd love to understand from you, how do you understand rights in a more philosophical sense when it comes to music? Because there's, of course, if we look at the LLM world, we all know words, so for that reason, we're all assuming that it's okay to, be doing stuff with words. But to me, it feels like there's a lot of people that come at music as, well, you can't train on any music and then be creating stuff that sounds a bit like it without, then you're stealing someone else's work. But my feeling is that when you liken it to what LLMs are doing, you actually have quite a wide space to navigate in.
And the way I see it is like copyright was made, hundreds of years ago to protect original work, and it served a great purpose. It made innovation prosper, and then now you have humans already kind of listen to music and they have inspiration, and then they use these reference sounds when they make music. But obviously it's sensitive and a machine does the same thing, which is why I think the core belief we have is just compensate and opt in and make sure everyone feels fairly treated. And then the machine or the model is just doing exactly what the human does, but it's just being assistive in this case. It's not actually, if you build products in a way where they're inspiring as opposed to making music on their own and feeding it to you, where you're not involved in the loop at all, then I think you're building the wrong products. If you're building more in an assistive way, then I think rights can exist. I think AI music at some point will also get protection. I don't know what that protection looks like, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Do you think that the one click and done type of production is going to be very difficult to solve without stepping on right holders' rights?
It depends on how the model was built. So for instance, 11 Labs built it in a fair way, and every generation, the revenue goes back to all the rights holders. So with that model, which is commercially cleared, any song is
you can grant those rights regardless of how it was made, whether it was one shot or a big project. But if the models weren't built in that way, then yeah, nothing can have commercial rights. So I think it's just about how you build the model.
Look, I mean, it's quite a nuanced topic. I mean, the reality is, the history of music is, I think we talked a bit about this before, is inspired by what's come before it. And I just finished reading the kind of most recent Beatles biography, John and Paul. I don't know if you've read it. It's a great book. And it just talks about all their influences and how they'd be in the studio, and they'd be like, "Well, we're going to use the beat from this kind of Bo Diddley track because that was a great beat, and that's going to be the kind of bass for the track. And then we're going to be inspired by a bass riff from some other genre, and then we're going to have obviously our own vocal thing." And so they've kind of, and the Beatles, one of the most innovative, extraordinary bands of our time. I mean, they were taking bits from their historical experience in music and melding it in, and that's what music's been about and how it evolves and builds. And so you can't say, well, there's a bit of a track that has a little bit of another track, and that shouldn't be allowed because we have no music, probably, or very little music downstairs. The other bit I think I kind of took away from that is when you kind of hear the conversations from the studios. They were saying to the producers, we need to make this sort of sound. We want to loop back this sound effect and create it. They were giving a text-based instructions to their producer on the sounds they wanted to try and create into parts of their song. So they were kind of, I'm not saying they were doing one-click song production, clearly they weren't, but there was a kind of textual base of coming up with some of the elements. Personally, I think as we discussed, I don't think one click is going to produce the world's best music. It's a starting point, which a lot of bands will have used. Is we want to use this sort of sound, we want to start with these kind of layers, and then we're going to riff on top of that and create on top of that, and that's what produces the magic. And the challenge for the copyright industry is, historically, there have obviously been cases brought against artists for plagiarizing tracks, and those cases are they take months and massive forensics to try and really disseminate whether it's really something's been copied or inspired and stuff. You can't do that with millions or billions of tracks, and so I think there is a still work to be done in trying to algorithmically discern if something has been infringed or not. And I think that will be an evolving space. Clearly the labels are actively getting involved in trying to help define that and work with some of the other companies to ensure the kind of the boundaries that are defined. But I think that's going to be a kind of bit of a moving feast.
I'd love to ask both of you, how do you navigate this in terms of trying to understand what will happen in the future? What I mean by this is we're all hearing news stories about, this lawsuit here. I know the Danish music industry, Coda has filed a lawsuit on behalf of multiple Danish artists against Suno, I believe it is. I'm sometimes looking at this and thinking, well, won't all of this be settled in the States and we will all kind of have to follow? Because it's the main music market globally, so far at least, is in the States. And if they decide, which the current administration seems like they think, it's a bit of a free fall, like what can you do? People listen to music, so can a computer, and then you can also generate music on the back of having listened to anything that you have just paid for, by acquiring that CD in the first while. Is this the right way to think about it? Like observe what's going on in the States and assume that will trickle to Europe, or should we think that this is going to probably evolve differently?
Well, if you look at the US, obviously is a big market. As it's a center for a lot of the big industry players, and I'm sure a lot of them will be dictated out of those offices and thought about. That said, I don't think that probably diminishes the views or the actions of local regulators, labels, artists, etc., in defending their work. And copyrights can be regional, can be global, and people can defend their work in the jurisdiction they have. They don't have to follow guidance elsewhere. I suspect that historically, at least my experience in the music industry, things have happened on a more of a global scale, maybe with some very small local exceptions, but have happened on a global scale. So probably, the thinking that comes out of the US makes sense, then that will be adopted, or we'll see whether it makes sense.
Yeah, that's a big mental jump to make these days.
I'm not commenting on that.
I know, Daniel, and I will not force Sundar to either. Let me instead save you from this morass and get us into the tech behind this. Sundar, I'd love to just ask you really quickly if you could try and explain to everyone, why is this even possible today? Why can we do this with music? Because it seems in a way even more magical than with words.
The cool paradigm that started all of this was diffusion models. So imagine you just feed like a song into this system that eventually just patches a bunch of noise. So at each step, it just adds random noise. And by the end of it, you have something that sounds nothing like the song. It's just a bunch of white noise, probably. And it obviously goes through massive compression before it does all this. So that's where the quality problem comes from. But then now the model just figures a way out to learn how to reconstruct that song from that piece of noise. And that's where the magic happens. And then there's been a lot of evolution from here in not just using pure diffusion models and actually using more like autoregressive transformer type architectures. And but this is the magic. Like anything you feed in gets broken down to something super random, and then we find a way to learn the path back. Pretty cool. I think it's kind of similar to how humans know sounds. You have the sound, and then when I hear a sound, I can map it back to like I know exactly how to design that sound. I can hear it, and I know this is EQ'd at 200 hertz. I can kind of tell, and that's exactly what these models do. So, which is why I think they're not just spitting out copies of what they've learned, but they're actually making music inspired by what they've learned. So yeah, I think there's a lot of resemblance there.
All right, so guys, from the technical, I now want to go into talking a bit about where are we headed? What is music going to be like in the future? Sundar, we're going to talk a bunch with Ash about this as well. So for that reason, I will just ask Daniel. And then after that, I think we should switch into our deep dive together with Ash, who is, of course, a very notorious producer in the world of music. So Daniel, asking you, where are we headed with the future of music? What do you think as an investor in this space that we should expect?
I think we're heading into really exciting territory. I think that as more people have the ability to create music, we continue to open up the kind of creative vein of the world. We know there's a lot of music inside of people. We know there's probably a lot that's not coming out yet. And I think I'm hoping that we also enter a world where a new form of kind of band and collaboration can exist. And I know that Sundar's been thinking about this, and hopefully we can talk about this in the future. But the concept of the band, at least for me, kind of growing up, was so important and was kind of the kind of essential part of music, and the whole kind of image and ethos and attitude and what that brought to the whole music experience. And it feels like it's gone away a little bit in more modern times to the single artist and to that world. And I'm hoping actually now we have a new form of tool that maybe enables a different type of collaboration. We'll begin to see a different type of band come together, which is, for sure, more digitally centric and is producing music in a different way, but allows people to connect in a group and kind of create the magic that we've had in the past as we produce some great new music.
It's funny that you pick up on the band thinking, because what I was thinking was it's going to unleash the individual creator. But of course, Sundar, if we go to you for a second, the point for you is that you're making music multiplayer now. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think exactly what Daniel said. You can choose to build a product in two ways. You can either hyper-personalize music and lose the social element, where everyone just creates their own music, or you can, for the first time, kind of bring the studio online, have multiple people make music together real time. That was just impossible before because you played video games with your friends because some of them were good, some of them were bad, and you'd kind of balance out. But you couldn't make music with your friends earlier because if you were bad, you just couldn't do anything. So that bridge goes away now. And we're kind of already set up for that in our product. And yeah, I think we'll see a future where maybe all three of us could make music together. One of us sings real time, one of us is generating AI loops, one of us is playing the piano. And yeah, that's a pretty cool world to build.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, I, for one, am very excited about the future. Daniel, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to jumping on together with me and Sundar. Sundar, we'll stay on to talk a bit with Ash. Thank you so much, Daniel.
My pleasure. Thanks both. Cheers.
Joining us now is Ash Pournouri, the visionary music entrepreneur, producer, and former manager of the legendary Avicii. With a career that shaped EDM and pop hits heard around the world through his label PRMD Music, Ash has also pioneered ethical AI in music via platforms like Sundar AI, where he's developed innovative models for genres like progressive house and big room. Today, we'll hear his insights on the evolving music landscape as a producer, artist, and manager, how he's integrating AI into his creative processes, common misconceptions about AI in music, and his vision for where the industry is headed. Ash, awesome to have you on. Did I get some of what I just said right, or was that just one big ramble?
Yeah, you got it right. I mean, my world is a little bit bigger these days. Not as much in music as I used to be, but wherever I can help great founders, I try to contribute. So,
talk a bit about your investing and helping founders. Like, I think everyone should know.
I mean, I rarely invest, just as a normal investor, because I just feel that there's so many other people that could do that, just providing funds and sit passively. So I usually get active, and for me to do that, I need to feel like I can contribute something. Obviously, the founder or the team has to feel I can contribute something, and I also have to believe in what they're doing to a point where I feel like they definitely need to win in one way or the other. So that's how I get involved in companies since long, and I've had a span of different undertakings since I left music about 10 years ago, coming on 10 years this year. And since then I've dove into the tech space because it's originally where I came from. People think I'm a music guy, but I'm originally a science and tech guy, and always follow that space from a distance. And then I try to apply my skill set from navigating the incredibly competitive music industry into the tech space. So I feel like it's given me a very unique position to help a lot of companies that way.
Sundar, when we first talked about this episode over Christmas, I said, do you know someone who is like really thoughtful about this from the industry that you think could be cool? And you said, I know just the guy. Could you talk just a bit about why you said Ash is the perfect guy? And
yeah, I mean, I met him a couple of weeks ago when I pitched to him for investment. That was my first touch point, and he kind of knew everything about the business. I know he worked with Avicii on one of my favorite songs all time. He's had a label. He's kind of been all over. So it felt like he was the insight into the industry that was super complex for a 23-year-old to fully comprehend. So it seemed like it was the right choice of someone to work with, someone to have as a mentor, someone to guide through the crazy world of music, especially when it's so dynamic as it is today, because you can probably pattern match and see what's happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and extrapolate that forward. So yeah, that's why I think Ash is goated.
When I said this to Sundar, it was because I thought we should get someone who's an expert witness to what's going on in the industry. Because now we've just had this long conversation with Daniel about all the meta stuff, which is interesting, but honestly, like the most exciting thing is hearing it from the horse's mouth, I was about to say. So tell us, Ash, what is going on? How are people reacting in the industry? What are you seeing?
If you look historically, the industry is generally very conservative in the lean forward aspect in general, right? Obviously, you have exceptions to that, but the industry tends to protect rather than be on board with development. It's anyone who's been in the industry knows it's heavily reliant on structures, administration, rights management, and there's a bunch of protecting guardrails, so to say, to keep the status quo. And as soon as someone comes in and tries to disrupt that, then there's always pushback from the major players, and there's a reason for that. It's their livelihood and their core business. So they rarely want to be on board with disruption. And as soon as it comes to abusing or using the rights for someone else's gain, you get the most pushback. That's when you get lawsuits and stuff that we've seen also in this space, where there are plenty of I guess, attacks and or feelings of attacks where they feel violated, they feel their rights have been violated for training models, for using it to sell an AI service or other. And so their response has been very firm and public. And it's led to them, kind of using these same old tricks where they try to gain control, they're trying to restrict, they're trying to limit, and then trying to gain part ownership if they can. We saw that with Spotify, we saw that with Napster, we saw that with plenty of other companies that have tried to get into the music industry space by not going about it, the way that they want to see it, which is would be the right way to kind of go in and say, hey, we want to pay you for the use, and then with very strict guardrails again, then proceed to developing our service or offering. So I think this is no exception. If I summarize my answer, I think there will be a lot of pushback, and if anyone is let through, it will be with control and guardrails, heavy guardrails.
What is your personal take? Like, do you think that the clear behemoth that we all know, I think, is Suno in this industry, but they're probably also the ones that have been more legally exposed in how they've chosen to go about it? Where do you think the market is?
My personal view is that you can't stop development. Like, it'll happen if the market wants it. That's the bottom line. I mean, legally, yes, you can restrict, but as we saw with all these file sharing services that kind of gave way to the ones that are legal today, like Spotify, they showed very clearly that there was a demand from the market and the audience, and eventually they just had to nurture that. Because I used to talk about this when I was in music, that I don't care personally, as from an artist standpoint, and from a I was a producer and songwriter, and from a creator standpoint, I don't care to monetize every little bit from my audience. Like, that's not why you're in the industry. If you're in the industry to monetize, you're probably there for the wrong reason. You're not really an artist, right? You're something else. But if you're really an artist and you're really there to expose your art and get as many people as possible to enjoy it, then your first priority is to reach people. I used to say, like, when people asked me, aren't you worried about your songs being on the Pirate Bay or free to listen on YouTube and whatever? And I was like, well, I know the audience is there, and that audience specifically, they won't, just because we say, oh, you can't listen to, you have to buy the album, the CD physically, or you have to pay for a subscription over here or whatever, that's not going to make them do it, And I just said, if we're not on the Pirate Bay, if we're not on YouTube, we don't exist to them at all. I'd rather find other ways to engage them and monetize either of them directly or indirectly by being creative or also around the business side of things. In short, I just think you can't really stop this development because there is a big demand. You can see it in the numbers, you can see it in the spread, you can see it in all the different social media platforms that use those platforms to create content that then gets viral exposure, etc. So you have to take that for what it is. That's what's going to happen no matter what. And then there's different ways to try to, limit or restrict or stop it momentarily. But I don't think you can do it in the long run.
And tell me, Ash, even though you've stepped out of the industry a bit, how do you see AI being adopted now in the artist process?
I mean, this is also a thing. So generally, everything comes down to packaging and how you formulate things, right? So, MTV, for instance, if they went out and said to the labels and artists, etc., said, hey, can we use your IP, your music videos to monetize, on our end? If that was the conversation, then they probably would have said, no, or they would have said, you have to pay us a lot of money, etc. The business model would never have held. But instead, they would package it as a marketing opportunity. So they basically said, give us your IP, and we're going to give you reach, and then you can sell a bunch of records. If they had just packaged that offer differently, I think they would have been stopped. So I think the same thing here. If you present the AI tools or AI services as a threat or as a replacement, you'll get a lot of pushback. But if you instead present them as tools, which they definitely are, if you use them right, then you get a completely different impression and acceptance and reception, among the industry. And I think that's what I've seen, with people who embrace AI in their work. Obviously, as anyone that uses AI in any field, like engineers in Copilot and et cetera, like, why wouldn't musicians benefit from that equally, and be able to see the greatness in, being productive, getting out of a creative, stuck hole, or in other ways, just increase their productivity, reach, creativity, all of the above. That's what I think is that's the answer I think is going to take this into being a standardized or more accepted use.
I think the fact that you couldn't make music 10 years ago if you just knew how to play the guitar, and now you can, just goes to show that the human is still very much involved in the loop. It's just so many more humans can now make music. It just wasn't possible before. So innately, it is still a tool. It's like when digital audio workstations came out 30 years ago, and then EDM was a new genre that was made. People always thought the same thing. It was like, recorded music is going to lose its value. No one's going to buy CDs. But, they just thought a computer was making the music. But, I mean, we saw that was probably the biggest era of growth in music, and it was still a tool. People mastered the DAW, like, Ableton and Logic, and they just made so many things that weren't possible 30 years ago. So I think AI is going to do the same.
There are two things I think that are relevant here. One is, there's constantly been a lowering of threshold of entry into the music industry, where you used to have to be able to play an instrument or have a great voice, and then you had tools like autotune, and you had different ways to play digitally, and you have access, and you had the different ways to record digitally, and you could cramp up the studios to smaller, cheaper, etc. Like, that threshold has always been pushed down, and then came the bedroom producer, and now you have all these AI tools. The other part is democratization. That's also increased over time, where before it was like, okay, if you went into the record store and you couldn't find an artist's record, that artist didn't exist anywhere, right? You couldn't get hold of it. So, it didn't really matter. Unless you got into the local record store of that audience, you couldn't exist to them. And then came all the democratization with more record stores first, and then digital, and then streaming, and then all that stuff. So I think it's just a different, level in the same progress, where those two things keep evolving. You have more democratization, and you have lowering of thresholds. That's exactly what's happening.
Can I ask you, Ash, a crazy question here? I'm gonna maybe put something like very simplistically and create a scenario that's not true, but to try and see how you react. If we remember back to the biggest hits you've ever made, and the biggest hits you've made in history, if AI had existed at the time, or in the future we're going into, will these be fully produced by AI? Would they just have been made quicker? Would you have been better at creating parts of those tracks that you only realize years after that this would have been really cool to have had in there, but we didn't realize until it had actually been played millions and millions of times? Now you would have been able to make an even better Avicii track. How do you see the impact on the individual track level?
I mean, it's hard to say generally, but just to put it in perspective, I don't think anyone would consider themselves I don't think any creator would consider themselves creative if they cheat, right? So if they just sit and write a random prompt passively and then put something out, it's hard to say like, oh, I did this, and feel good about it, right? Especially as a creator, because like I said, a creator has a different drive, and they want people to appreciate their creativity. They don't want to take credit for someone else normally, right? And so I think it's the same thing here. It's like, well, I 100% would think that tools would be helpful for sure, as they were. I mean, if we were, born in a different decade or belong to a different generation, we probably wouldn't have the preconditions there to create these tracks in the beginning, in the first place, right? So we already used whatever was available to us with home studios, where we had access to all these VSTs and all these different instruments that wouldn't have been possible, 20, 30 years earlier. But now we were. So the same way, I feel like that would have influenced, to have access to AI tools would have influenced the music today. but it still would be a craft. It would still come from an idea that you have in your head that you want to get out. And you just need, you're just using all these tools to get that out. And I think that's the best example that I can give of why AI is a tool and not a threat.
Yeah. You know how they say it takes about 10,000 hours for a skill to be mastered? The top quartile of like AI artists are like orders of magnitude better than just the average person prompting. And that's because these people probably already know how to make music. They're throwing their unfinished projects. They're trying to re-seek inspiration that they lost somewhere in their hard drive. And the way they use these tools is just so different to just a one-shot prompt. They're almost imagining a new set of possibilities for some of their old music, giving it a bit of life now. So I think even in this era, you need to probably have those 10,000 hours in these tools to really be the best at it. Because if you just write a prompt, you're going to be one of the other 200 million people that are just prompting for a jingle. So I think, yeah, our tools still have a meaningful and probably a much higher amount of value than it has today, just because creativity is all that differentiates in a world where everyone can create music.
Ash, final question for you. I want to ask you, if you're looking at the artist process, the artist work, the craft of doing music today, how do you think it looks like in just 5 years from now? Will it be significantly different for every single one who's creating out there?
I think it's so hard to imagine. I think even like 2 years, away is hard to imagine, because if you ever seen these development, graphs where you go like, okay, you start slow and then there's a pivot and there's an exponential growth, and then you're standing in a straight up curve, right? And we've seen them in school since we were young, and we've seen them applied to different things. But it's very difficult to imagine what it feels like to be in this slope. But this is where we are now. This is what it feels like. Like every day you have new tools, you have new technology, you have new things happening, you have so much going on at the same time that it's impossible to really try to project the same development forward. Now we're in this straight up showing line where everything's up on its head, basically. Where I'm excited, but I'm also a little bit wary of making predictions, because I know whatever I think is probably going to be wrong based on history. It's like, this is a completely new era with something that we've never experienced before, and we've talked about it, but we've never lived it, and now we're living it, and it's like, it just feels surreal in a lot of ways. That's what I just think it's impossible to predict the future now, because we're not talking 2 years in traditional sense. Like things happen, like it's like almost 10 years happen in 1 year.
There are many coders that had stepped away from coding that now, with vibe coding and everything, had gone back to coding. Are you feeling that itch more now than ever to go back to music and say, fuck it?
Yeah, great question. I do, because I have all these ideas that I don't have time for, but now I could get them out much quicker, and I could actually, do it in a way where I don't have to involve, other people, and I don't have to sit and learn, too many new skills, and, it just opens up a whole new world. And then back to the point I was making about creativity. If you have it in you, that's what creativity is. It's not about the tools that you learned. I mean, if you sit and play an instrument and I tell you what notes to play, who's the creator? Is it you who do what I say because you know how to play the instrument, or is it me who came up with the idea to put those notes out? So short answer, yes. I feel the itch, and I understand why people want to go back, because you skip a lot of the admin, which is very difficult to like. I think for a lot of people, maybe not everyone.
We should collab on a track, Ash, if you do get back.
Exactly.
Ash, thank you so much. Sundar, thank you so much as well. This was incredible. Like, if AI can unleash people like you to create more music on your own, and you to not transition out of the industry, there are a lot of amazing people that transition out because of the admin, because of what it just takes to be in the music industry. So if we can keep your creative minds pumping, I think we're all the better for it. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Andreas, thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Great to be here.